Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to use the Secure Messaging Gateway Policy Import and Export tool. I recommend watching this video twice to fully absorb the content. Some of the details presented will tie together after you've seen an overview of the features. You'll find this feature on the Policy Management page with these two buttons at the top of the page, Import and Export. The main purpose of importing and exporting is to move the configuration of policies between different SMG systems, although it can also be used to transfer policy data within a single system as well. If you want to copy policies within an SMG system, it's best to use the clone button paired with the move button to clone different organizational units in a multi-tenant system, which doesn't require any data to be moved outside the SMG system. You can achieve essentially the same result with import and export, but it requires files to be saved locally and then re-imported. So let's briefly talk about some of the use cases for the import and export feature. Primary purpose of exporting policies is to be able to transfer policy configurations from one SMG system to another. This allows sharing of filter configurations between SMG systems and gives service providers a way to create default configurations for their customers that can be easily installed into a new system. Having the ability to export only the policy makes it easy to move filter functionality from one system to another without affecting the localized configuration, such as the SMTP and domain settings. Exporting a policy also provides a useful method to back up the policy configurations. In some cases, it can be quicker and easier to spin up a new SMG server and simply re-import the policy configuration to get the system back up and running. The next use case is keeping track of changes in your configuration. Exporting policies regularly provides a way of looking back through previous configurations to compare what's changed. And lastly, the policy export is useful for getting support for SMG policy configurations. Our support staff can request your policy configuration and import it into a test system to inspect it for problems. So let's take a look now at how to use it. We're going to start by looking at how to export policies. By default, the export button is disabled. To enable the button, select one or more policies for export. The export dialog that appears then asks which components of the policy you want to export. If you hover your mouse over any item in these dialog boxes, you'll find a tooltip explaining in more detail what the options do. I'm now going to bring up two systems side by side to talk about what these options refer to. The first option refers to what's known as the policy qualifications, which are the settings that determine whether SMG will scan a message with this policy. You should uncheck this box if the recipient of the export data does not need or does not match your configuration. The second option is the scanner configuration itself, where you configure the filter nodes. The node identities refers to internal identities associated with each individual scanner node. Every node on your system is assigned a unique ID, and these are used for re-exporting and re-importing data to update configurations rather than replacing them. We'll be taking a look at that when we run through our examples. Finally, the option for exporting selected nodes allows us to extract specific nodes for export. When you enable this option, you'll be presented with all of the nodes in the selected policy, as you can see here. There are a couple of limitations with this option. When you export individually selected nodes, it only exports the components and not the workbench instances. The most common reason for exporting individual nodes is to provide content updates, such as a word list. The other limitation is that this option will only be shown when a single policy is selected. If you export more than one policy, as follows, the option isn't shown. When multiple policies are selected for export, all of the policies are exported into a single file. When re-importing this export file, you'll be given the choice of which policies to import. To export multiple policies into different files, each policy must be exported separately. I'm now going to run a few exports with different options selected, and then we'll look at how we can import the data that comes out of each. The first export will be of a single policy with default settings. Then let's rename the file so we can identify it later. The default name of the export file contains the date of the export to make it easy to identify. The second export will be of all of the policies, and we'll disable the node identity export for this one. Without the node identities, this exported file will always generate new scan configuration data if it's imported. In other words, it cannot be used to update or refresh previous exports and imports of these policies. And now the last export I'll be doing is a custom rule export. I've created these two policies with a variety of filters that I want to distribute to other SMG users. These policies aren't set up like normal configurations, but instead contain pre-configured nodes with various rules that I've created specifically to be added into existing scan configurations. The intent here is to maintain a centralized set of rules that can be distributed via an export to update other systems. For now, I'm going to export all of the nodes in these configurations, and we'll return here later to see how exporting for update works. And that's all there is to export policy data. Now let's take a look at importing that back in. I have a separate empty SMG system here, ready to import data into it. First, we'll want to navigate to the policy management page. And to start with, let's import the basic policy we exported previously. Clicking the import button, we're first asked to load an import file. We'll select the default policy we exported earlier. And the policy is loaded locally, and we can see the name of the policy that was exported. To proceed with the import, select the policy from the list to bring up the import mode. Two modes for importing are the full policy and just the scanner configuration. The core difference between these modes is where the policy is imported to. The full policy mode creates a brand new policy, and the scanner configuration mode imports just the scanner configuration into an existing policy. If I select the scanner configuration import now, I'm told that I must have a policy selected to use this mode. We'll come back to that later. For now, I'll just use the full policy import and leave the option to append timestamp enabled. This option suffixes the current time to the policy name to make it easy to identify in your policy list. You can always change the name later. Clicking import runs the import, and when it's finished, we're told that we need to reload the page to see the imported policy. I can do that simply by clicking the policy management page in the nav menu. And we can see that the policy was successfully imported. If we look at the policy scan configuration, we can see that all of the settings for the policy have come in, and this policy is now an active part of the scan process. Let's head back to the policy management page and clear out the policy list. And we're going to import the file that contained multiple policies this time. As we can see with this file, all of the selected policies are listed, and we can go ahead and select one or more of the items. And again, refreshing the policy list, we can see that we've imported all the policies as new policies into our configuration. This is especially useful for recovering a full system quickly. For the next example, we're going to create a new policy. We'll use the policy creation wizard to build an inbound SMTP policy. One of the policy exports I did earlier just exported specific nodes, which we'll be importing into this new policy. To do this, I select my policy and then click the Import button. I'm going to select the custom node configuration export file and choose the custom rules policy from the list. This time I have a policy selected, so I can use the scanner configuration import option. On a side note, if multiple policies are selected, the import process will import the configuration to all of the selected policies, which is useful to update nodes across your system efficiently. I'm going to leave the replace option enabled, which has no effect in this instance as the nodes I'm importing don't exist yet. Turning this option off is generally not useful, as it will cause duplicate nodes to be imported if they already exist. However, if you have a specific reason to import nodes as duplicates, turning this checkbox off is the way to do that. And finally, we'll hit the import button to complete the process. Let's go and take a look at the scanner configuration to see what was just imported. We can see here that there are some extra filters for IP address and message text. When I created this policy, I gave the nodes a title and some notes to make it obvious which ones were imported. Let's rearrange the view a little so we can see what we're looking at more clearly. And as we see, the new nodes don't exist on my workbench yet, but I'm free to now take these imported nodes and use them as I see fit. And let's quickly look at what's configured inside these nodes. We see that this IP address filter has no information yet in it, and the message text filter is also unconfigured. So let's have a look at how we would update these from an export. We'll go back to the system that generated the original export file, and the policy we're interested in is the custom rules for distribution. And let's add a couple of entries into each of these nodes. Now, for the purpose of demonstration here, we're just going to send an update of the text node with this next export. So we come to the policy management page, select the policy that contains the rules that we want to export, and we're going to select specifically the message text node. Now we can return to the live system, come into its policy management, select our policy, import the update, import the scanner configuration, tell it that we want to replace the content of existing nodes. And if we now head over to the policy configuration and view the text configuration of this node, we see the changes that we exported have been successfully updated in our target system. For our final example, let's look at the custom export of a configuration with links. This option is similar to the node update, but it takes over control of the layout of the configuration data. If links are readjusted in the configuration, the import will reassign the links, so be aware of this when using the tool this way. It can happily coexist with existing configuration, but it's a good idea to keep the sets of scan nodes isolated to prevent unexpected anomalies. The position on the workbench are not changed after they are imported, so the target system can be laid out neatly without worry about it being messed with from the import process. Let's go back to our live system, and we're going to import that policy into the existing inbound mail filter that I've created. Now that it's imported, let's go and take a look at the configuration. We can see the nodes have dropped in over the top of my existing configuration, so we will need to come in here and do a little bit of cleanup. So the result of this import has brought in a fully functional set of active nodes directly onto my policy. Now let's take a look at how we can make updates to this. Going back to my source policy, I'm going to make a couple of changes. Firstly, I'm going to modify my RBL list. And I might decide to add an extra node. And once we've made our changes, we can switch back to the policy list and re-export the policy, again without the qualifications. Now coming back to the live system, let's import these rules and take a look at the scan configuration. We see that the new rule is misplaced on the workbench, but that it's connected itself to the previously imported nodes. I can move this node to tidy up the workbench. And if I look at my RBL modifications, I can see that the updates have come in here as well. This should demonstrate the key differences between exporting individual nodes and full policy configurations, where one exports individual nodes that can be consumed and updated, and the other exports configurations that are predefined in their use. Both methods update the content the same way, but the different methods change the control you have over the imported configuration. The final thing we're going to look at is a nuance when importing datasets that contain white or black lists. If we import our inbound mail filter policy using the scanner configuration mode, we find an extra option here called list data. This option appears if the import data contains any black or white lists. In these instances, you have the option to either overwrite the existing data in the black and white lists or to merge the two lists together. This is important when using an import into a policy that is linked into QMS whitelists and blacklists, in which case you should use the merge entries option to keep data that users have submitted into their black and white lists. And that's it for this tutorial. Now that you have an understanding of how this feature works, and as I mentioned at the beginning, it's worthwhile watching this training video a second time to clarify how some of the functionality interacts back and forth between the import and export data. Thanks for your time. I hope this has been helpful. Goodbye.